Let's take a look at what's making news in print and online this morning. We're joined now by Executive Director at the Australia Institute, Ben Oquist. Ben, thanks for coming in. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with this top story on the Oz about One Nation and how they're polling and how that affects the main parties.
Yeah, it's the first poll of the election campaign. News polls out today, a week early, normally comes every 2 weeks, and it shows not much movement in the two-party preferred vote on 52-48, where it's been for a long time, thereabouts, 52 or 53. But interestingly, One Nation's vote down to 4%, which means correspondingly the major parties, or both parties, primary votes gone up a bit. Labor's vote up 2 points on primary to 39, and the coalition's up 1 point to 39, and that's really come at the expense of Pauline Hanson and One Nation. And of course that comes out in the wake of the cash for guns controversy that we saw. But interestingly, Pauline Hanson herself in the paper blames it on the rise of other right-wing minor parties. And I guess there we're talking about Fraser Anning, Clive Palmer and the United Australia Party has been spending a lot of money on those ads, as we know. And it could mean that kind of centre-right or hard-right votes are fracturing a bit and causing One Nation's vote to drop.
It's pretty dismal result nationally, but One Nation could still prove influential in some central Queensland seats. Care of the preference flows. The National Party being very careful to say they won't follow Scott Morrison's lead and put One Nation behind Labor on how to vote cards. So they know the impact One Nation preferences could still have.
I think but you're right, particularly in Queensland, that One Nation vote, while nationally might be 4%, in some areas the paper speculates 10 or 20% in some seats, and those preferences could be critical. And then, of course, there's the Senate, and One Nation has started with 4 senators in this current parliament. It's down to 2 after resignations. Pauline Hanson herself not up for election, so they're trying to get a senator, a new one in Queensland. And while they're at 4% nationally, Pauline Hanson's been out of the spotlight a bit, as the paper says this morning, with some illness issues. They could still be influential in Queensland in preferences, and importantly, in the Senate. The Australia Institute did some analysis a while ago showing that they could be a serious balanced player after the election as well.
It'll be interesting to see what future the election result delivers to One Nation. Also in the Guardian, there's pressure for an integrity commission building. I suppose during this time of an election campaign, this is sort of something that people might be thinking would be a good idea.
Yes, it comes with a poll commissioned by the Australia Institute, showing that there's a low level of trust in politics, and part of that low level of trust is one of the reasons the case is building for this federal anti-corruption agency, and there's a new push on for that today with a meeting in Canberra. I know the Shadow Attorney General Mark Dreyfus is there, as well as Tim Storer and the Greens, I think, too. And this low level of trust in politics that this poll has found also shows that there's 80% support for a federal anti-corruption watchdog, or a federal ICAC, if you like.
Where do both parties stand on that? I think Labor's committed to one. Is that understanding?
But interestingly, both sides of politics are now committed to some form of anti-corruption watchdog.
A different makeup.
And this is what this story goes to. The real battle now is over the model of it. And this poll shows that there's strong support amongst all voters across all political parties for a strong federal anti-corruption watchdog. And the poll finds that there's big level support for the corruption watchdog to have public hearings, a big level support for that anti-corruption watchdog to be allowed to take complaints from whistleblowers. And one of the people who's been pushing for this federal anti-corruption watchdog, Stephen Charles, points out in this story that he says the model that the government proposes will be very weak. And he points to an open letter by 34 ex-judges, unprecedented, he says, calling for a strong federal anti-corruption watchdog with real teeth and powers.
Now, let's go to the Sydney Morning Herald. It has a story on Facebook possibly limiting live streaming in the wake of Facebook live streaming that awful Christchurch terror attack a few weeks back.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? We had that not so many years ago. It seems like the internet was going to bring great freedom and hope and joy to us all. And now we're in this debate, and particularly in the wake of that Christchurch massacre, about how to better regulate the internet, and in particular live streaming, of course, when that live stream after that Christchurch massacre stayed up for up to an hour, we're told. The government since then has been talking about new regulations, has passed legislation for big fines and potential jail terms if these live streams aren't taken down more quickly. And this story poses that Facebook itself is thinking about some restrictions on who can live stream, in particular who can live stream from mobile devices.
It's hard to monitor, I guess, given the size of social media and Facebook in particular. It feels like with social media we are sort of learning as we go, and there was a story the other week about artificial intelligence and basically the need to stay ahead of the game rather than what we're seeing with social media, which is learning as we go.
Well, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because, yeah, there's Facebook Live, but there's many other platforms that broadcast live. I was watching Bill Shorten's press conference on Periscope on the weekend. And I think increasingly people are using all sorts of different ways of watching things live, and sometimes, of course, it's a really good service, but it can be a bad one. And there is going to have to be more regulation of this if we're going to stop such incidents in the future. OK,
it's election campaign time, Ben, which means it's stunt time as well. You've zeroed in on one in particular involving Matt Canavan. Yes,
the Courier Mail's got a story today talking about a social media post from the Resources Minister eating an onion. And we know where this started with Tony Abbott's famous incident of eating an onion. I guess all publicity is good publicity for politicians in an election campaign. I did note Matt Canavan said it wasn't as bad as he thought it was going to be. I thought that's pretty low base.
That's a very low base indeed.
But it didn't end well for Tony Abbott. I'm not sure if that means the same thing for Matt Canavan.
It's a fine balance with these sort of stunts because obviously there's somewhat of a rehearsal behind them, but you want them to look natural as well. It's sort of that fine balance.
Yeah, he's really enjoying it too.
Yeah, this one looks a little bit derivative, of course, of Tony Abbott. I don't know if it's because he's battling the unpopularity of the Adani coal mine and he thinks an onion might be better than that. But you see a lot of publicity for Bill Shorten and for Scott Morrison. But for that second tier of ministers, it is very hard to cut through in an election campaign that really focuses very presidentially on the leaders. So I guess he's thinking any publicity is good publicity.
And on that basis, and we won't show this image, Jackie Lambie in Tasmania over the weekend was photographed doing something unspeakable with a Pluto pup. It's just... It's all about attention, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting one because that Senate race in Tasmania is important, and it's a small state where the profile of an individual in the Senate can make a big difference in Tasmania and South Australia, where they're smaller states. So I think any publicity is good publicity when you're hunting that last Senate seat.
Well, I think with
I don't think we're going to show that.
4.5 weeks left of the campaign, I think we'll be seeing many, many more stunts to come, I'd say.